I have to say that's a better introduction than I get for most of my presentations. So we've had the welcomes now, and again, I want to thank everyone for being here. But what I wanted to do for a few minutes is talk a little bit about Visa's journey through innovation. As most of you know, there's been an unprecedented amount of change in the payments and the commerce industry. And I think as we are halfway through that journey, some of the lessons we've learned, some of the key themes that we look at have a lot of relevance for everybody in this room, regardless of how you're focusing on innovation, which industry you're in, what stage of evolution. And so I'll talk a little bit about Visa, but mostly what I want to talk about is how we think about the commerce landscape today and how we've had to adapt to what is an unprecedented amount of change in our industry. And I think that's analogous to a lot of what's going on in all the industries that are going to be discussed at this year's Webit.Festival. But before I talk about our innovation journey, I just want to talk for a few minutes about where it started. If you think about what's happened in commerce over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a bringing together, this convergence of changes in consumer behaviors, changes in regulation, and changes in technology that has forever changed the landscape for payments and commerce in Europe, but around the world. First, if you start with what's happened in terms of consumers, the ubiquity of mobile devices and tablets and smart devices and Amazon Echoes and virtual reality and augmented reality and blockchain have put more control and more expectations in consumers' hands than ever before. And so when we think about what's happened with payments, we kind of got to decide on the evolution of plastic and then the chip and the acceptance devices. But because consumers expect from payments the same experience they have from social media or enterprise applications or music or gaming, we've had to adapt as an industry to these changing consumer expectations. If you take a look at the changes in technology, we're seeing a continued acceleration of new technologies, many of which didn't look like they were going to affect commerce, but they all have. Right? So it's not just smartphones and the ability to put a Visa card digitally on your phone. It's people have expectations about making payments in a virtual reality or an augmented reality situation. They have expectations about building payments into a wearable so they don't have to have their phone, never mind their wallet, when they go out. So the technology that is driving innovation and change in commerce is accelerating at a rate that we've never seen before. And then the last thing that's changed in this convergence is the role of regulation. It's particularly acute here in Europe with PSD2, the regulation that both drives innovation. They've forced the banks to open up their networks, expose APIs to allow startups and young companies to get people's payment information and account information with their permission. But at the same time, they've reinforced the role of security through strong customer authentication, or what we call two-factor authentication on many transactions. So on the one hand, we have regulators around the world who actually want to drive cash out of the system. They want more transparency, they want more security for payments, they want more global connectivity, and that really helps us as a payments ecosystem. But at the same time, they demand it have more and more security and provide a more and more open ecosystem. And so we're trying to balance those efforts as well. So the landscape that we have in payments is similar, I think, to the landscape that many of you have in your industries. It's the role of technology, the changing tastes of the consumer, and the role of regulation. So if that's where we start in terms of the things that are driving change in our industry, for the next few minutes, I want to talk about 4 or 5 things that have shaped Visa's view about innovation, and hopefully they'll have some relevance in the industries you're working in. The first thing that we look at is that we've got to completely change the way we think about payments. I mean, at its core, regardless of all these changes, security is at the center. And the good news is, every mode of payment is more secure than the last one. Chip was better than magstripe. Contactless is better than chip. What we're doing now using mobile location and device ID and biometrics is better than the first technologies on phone. And so security continues to get better as we innovate with payments. But at the same time, consumers also want simplicity in payments. They want the networks and the banks and the technology players in our industry to work out all of the complexity, and payments can be complex. They want it simple. And so if you take a look at a lot of the innovation that's going on in our industry today with all of these neobanks or new payment players, they're taking age-old experiences, loaning money, looking up prices for goods, opening up a bank account, getting a mortgage, and they're driving through technology an unprecedented amount of simplicity. And so that's one of the focuses that we have for Visa as well. And then the third one is it's got to be seamless. As I said earlier, people expect from payments the same kind of seamless experience they get from gaming. They want to go from the large screen to the Nintendo Switch to their mobile phone, and they want to pick up right where they left off. That's their expectation. And they want the same thing from payments. So balancing through our innovation program, and I think for all of you, security at the core, but then these customer expectations of creating new seamless and increasingly simple services so that we address all the complexity in the background. And so that's been one cornerstone of our innovation approach. A second one is we've learned through this process the power of partnerships. I mean, Visa's been a relatively successful company for most of our 60-year history, but if you take a look at it, until very recently, we were a closed network. I mean, it was a very large closed network, 40 million merchants, 23,000 banks, 3 billion cardholders, but you really only got invited if you were a Visa license holder and a direct kind of physical connection. That's how we drove security. We made up the rules for the scheme and the way it worked. And it provided a high level of security and consistency around the world. I mean, the magic of Visa is I can arrive in Sofia and I can go to a restaurant like I did last night, and I put my Visa card down, and I'm completely secure that my payment is protected, and so is the merchant, and we've never met each other before. I mean, the magic of payments is the ability for strangers to conduct commerce with complete security. But if you take a look at it, then when we looked at all the technology and consumer demands, we couldn't be that closed network anymore. We had to open up to new platform providers. The group I started 7 years ago, Strategic Partnerships, was all because we realized that it wasn't just the banks and the networks. It was the Apples and the Googles and the Stripes and the Microsofts and the Facebooks and the Ubers that were increasingly driving commerce. And so another thing that we learned in this innovation journey that I think is relevant for everybody here is the closed ecosystems, the closed approach, the proprietary technology doesn't work. And so we've focused on partnerships in a way that's unprecedented as part of this innovation journey. And it started with large partners, some of the companies I've mentioned, but increasingly it's focusing on startups, emerging fintechs. We probably look at Visa through our venture program at 300 to 400 companies a year around the world, and are accelerating the rate at which we make investments in startups or incubate or accelerate. And so when we think about partnerships at Visa, it's small and large. The other thing that we realized when we looked at Visa as part of our innovation journey is that because of technology, we have the ability to create a network that is as global and as seamless and as large an ecosystem as we ever have. If you take a look at Visa, as I said, we've been very successful, but outside of Western Europe and the United States and Canada, some markets in Asia, it's really been focused on the wealthy and the traveler. Right? If you think about it, Visa was accepted everywhere, but in a lot of markets, other than the ones I've just mentioned, it was really at hotels and restaurants and department stores as opposed to this broad acceptance. But now with technology, we're able to deepen our ecosystem so an occasional merchant, the gardener, our babysitter, can now accept Visa payments on his or her phone. We can go into our parts of East and West Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, where there hasn't been acceptance, and because of low-cost acceptance, really drive the size and the shape of the ecosystem to get to the people that are unbanked or underbanked, to get to the people who have to use cash but don't want to, because in many markets cash is expensive and it can actually be dangerous, and they want the security and the convenience of digital payments, and we weren't able to provide it. So when we think about our innovation journey as well, I think the fourth thing we thought about was how we can harness this technology, not just to create that simplicity and that customer experience and the security, but expand the role of the ecosystem. And I'll just give you one example. 5 years ago, we started working what we called mobile point of sale. these low-cost point-of-sale devices that weren't tied to fixed telecommunications, they weren't tied to fixed electricity, and they allowed almost anybody to accept payments in their hands, tied to a mobile phone. Well, it took us 50 years to where we would say, or 55 years to where we'd say there's 40 million places you can use your Visa card. And now it's 55 million, and it's growing, that's in 5 years, and it's growing millions every year because we've untethered acceptance and been able to provide it in places that would never be able to accept cards before. And so that's just one example of how we're trying to build the ecosystem as a key part of our innovation agenda. Well, I'll go back. I think the other thing that we learned when we looked at this innovation agenda is just generally, culturally, how we had to become open for business. You know, if you thought about Visa, there was a lot of payments people with a long time experience in Visa that really knew our rules really well, really understood our relationships with the banks really well, started to understand our relationships with the merchants. And what we realized, and I think this is a message for everybody, is we really had to retool our talent inside Visa and able to take advantage of all the changes that were going on in the ecosystem. If you look at us now, you know, we're hiring people that are expert in agile development, people that are API natives and digital first, people that are classic design school trained in human-centered design and design school thinking. You know, these are talents that we wouldn't even thought about kind of 6 or 7 years ago at Visa, and they've really now become the cornerstone of our innovation agenda. We've also realized that we have to promote ourselves as increasingly a technology company, not a payments company. And we are. At our core, we're a technology company. So in the last 4 or 5 years, we've opened up innovation centers in London, in San Francisco, in Singapore, in Dubai, in Buenos Aires, in Sao Paulo, in Berlin. We're looking at one in Paris. We're looking at one in Istanbul, because we realize that in order to harness all of the innovation that's going on in markets that are large and that markets that are small, we need centers where people can come and experience Visa, take a look at our own APIs, develop on top of them so that we can continue to expand the shape and the scope of the ecosystem. And so at Visa, you know, when we think about our innovation journey, I'll say that we're halfway through it. It's never ending, but if you take a look at the real acceleration that we focused on, it's been 5 years, and I think we've probably got another 5 to go, you know, to really retool our talent, to continue to look at innovative startups that can help us, to broaden our partnerships that I talked about. We've made a good progress, but every day there's new partners that we need to take a look at it and develop these relationships with, to continue to change our mindset from a very large closed loop to this company that's open for business for a broad range of ecosystem players. And last thing I'll say is, for a lot of you out there, when you think about your businesses, except for the fintechs here, and I know every year there's more and more fintechs, commerce may not be the focus of your business, but at some point, taking advantage of the innovation in commerce and the drive to these new consumer experiences, or how we roll out broader acceptance, it will become a part of your strategy. If you're going to be successful, commerce will become part of your strategy. And increasingly, I talk to companies who didn't think they were in the commerce business, and then 2 or 3 years into their startup journey, they realize that commerce isn't just about accepting payments, it's strategic to the growth of their company. So again, I just wanted to spend a few minutes to talk about how Visa thinks about innovation, some of the challenges we've encountered along our journey. As I said, we're halfway through it, and hopefully provide some insights that we can all think about as we kind of retool ourselves to take advantage of changes in technology and consumer expectation and all the developments that we see here. So again, on behalf of Visa, thanks again for attending this event. I know you'll hear from more of my colleagues over the next 2 days. Delightful to be here in Sofia, and enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you very much.